Hello and welcome to Outer Experience. My name is Colton and today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite bands of all time, Trivium. So Trivium became one of my favorite bands back in high school. There was, in the early days of YouTube, there was a video about misunderstood lyrics, and Pull Harder on the Strings of Your Martyr was one of them. And it sounded like, boat rudder. And it was really funny. It was kind of like a meme before memes existed. And while it was a funny video to watch just because of the translation actually fitting and what it actually sounded like, I remember thinking the guitars were awesome, the melodies were awesome, and I was always kind of digging the song. And then Trivium came out with their cover of Master of Puppets, and Metallica, who was my favorite band at the time, was kind of in their bad stage of, releasing Saint Anger, and not really sure where they were going, but Trivium was kind of like the band that took over that mantle for me as far as like new music to get excited about. Then they released the album Crusade, and as a Metallica fan, again, that one really resonated with me. But we're not here to talk about just the Crusade. We're talking about all of Trivium's albums because I feel that they have such a cool journey in finding their sound, where in the beginning they had the more metalcore, real heavy type of sounds of Ember to Inferno, Ascendancy. Then they explore the thrash metal roots with the Crusade. Then they go and kind of mix those all together with Shogun. And then it's kind of a little bit of flip-flopping and seeing exactly what works best for their style. So a very interesting discography and one that I'm going to be talking about. So here we go. Ember to Inferno, the one that started it all, baby. A very impressive album when you think about how old Matt Heafy and the gang were around this time. I think he was like 17. And it's really impressive. Very interesting structures in these songs, very complex riffs, very interesting melodies, and a lot of the seeds that would come to bloom as like Trivium were to find their sounds. The reason why this ranks the last place on mine truly is because I just haven't spent a lot of time with it. I think of all the Trivium albums, this is the one that I haven't listened to the most. And that's because it's kind of draining for me. It's a very raw sound. Matt's screaming is much drier. Could be due with the production, but also could be the fact that he's just kind of figuring out exactly how he wants to sound. The melodies are really strong. They've got some amazing songs on this one, of course. Some highlights for me are title track Ember to Inferno, Pillar of Serpents, and Requiem. But there isn't a low light on this album, which is great. But again, I think spending more time with this may change in the rankings, but for now, it's going to take my number 10 spot. Silence in the Snow, coming in at number 9, is Trivium's No Scream album. Matt Heafy, of course, post Vengeance Falls, had to change up his vocal delivery on this run, on this next album, because he had blown out his vocal cords on tour. I think is when they were at some festival, I'm trying to remember. But it wasn't the worst news when I heard that this was going to be like a no screams type of album, because again, one of Trivium's main strengths, in my opinion, is their melodies. I think they do a phenomenal job at making their songs very gratifying with how well the melodies are structured. So I was actually excited with the single being released, which was the title track Silence in the Snow, which had been a resurrected riff from the Shogun era, which is just like such an interesting era. They have a few songs like that that are really good. I don't know what they were up to during that time, but there was just some songwriting magic during that time. But I really liked that song. I thought vocally, with the different delivery of Matt's voice, it still worked. Again, the melody was so strong, the song was real hooky, but it was also heavy. With the lack of screaming, it was still heavy. So why this album falls low on my list, though, is it becomes very samey when you listen to the whole album as a whole. I think structurally the songs, there's nothing really different there. I mean, it's of course verse, chorus, bridge, solo, verse, chorus. Or not even verse, chorus, it just ends up with the final chorus. And I found the structure just to be a little bit too repetitive, especially when they're using their introductions as the chorus riff or the main riff underneath the chorus. But again, some songs on here are great. Highlights would be the title track, Silence in the Snow. I like Rise Above the Tides. I like Beneath the Sun. And I like Breathe in the Flames, the final track, which I thought was a little bit heavier. You can hear a little bit more of the grit in Matt's voice. However, the lowlights on these are just some of the, I think, most uninteresting Trivium songs. The lowlights, I would say, are Pull Me From the Void, which I just don't really like the chorus. I think that one just doesn't rub me the right way. And then Until the World Goes Cold. Not a fan of that one. I think the chorus is a little bit too... It just doesn't, it doesn't sound like them. Anyway. Number 8 is The Crusade, or the Metallica album. This again was my onboarding point with Trivium, officially. Again, I got into the song Pull Harder on Your Strings, You're a Martyr, but hadn't listened to the entire album of Ascendancy yet. And so I listened to Crusade all the way through by the recommendation of a buddy of mine, and I just remember being really excited about it. This was kind of the divisive album, one of their first of many divisive albums, where a lot of the fans of the Ascendancy couldn't join them on the ride with the Crusade. And I can understand why, because for some it felt like an impersonation of Metallica. But given outside of that context, or with enough time that has passed, I'm finding a lot more people are more open to this one because there's some really great riffs on here. There's some really great songs. I think some of the lyrics get a little bit too cheesy, at the risk of, I know some people are gonna really like them, but just in my opinion, there's some of the stuff where it's like break every bone in your face. As cool as I like To the Rats, I just think that line is kind of, I don't know, it's a little teenage angsty. But I think that's kind of the weaker point of the album, because I find that Matt Heafy's lyrics, the strongest for me, or my personal favorites, are the ones that are most obscure, where I'm like, oh, I don't really know what Torn Between whatever, Skyla and True, I don't know how to pronounce that stuff. Or Sword Over Damocles. I don't know how to pronounce that word either. But anyway, those ones I find are really interesting, because I think Matt's a well-read guy, at least it sounds like it. And A Gunshot to the Head of Trepidation, or, Caustic Are the Ties That Bind. Like, he's using he's using pretty well-read words. And I remember using one of those in an essay, and they were like, oh man, impressive, you used the word caustic properly. Anyway, so Crusade just being them tapping into the thrash metal stuff, I think yields itself to some of the weaker lyrics because they're so digestible, and they kind of got away from like being more obscure. But highlights on this album, the opening song, Ignition, I think is great. I think Entrance of the Conflagration, actually, there we go, that's a difficult one. I think that one's really cool because it sets a tone really well and a really cool atmosphere. And then the title track, The Crusade, I think is one of their strongest songs ever, because it does what a good Trivium song does, which is tell a story, and that one does it without lyrics, and I think it's a phenomenal song. The lowlights on here, the band's least favorite song I've ever done was The Rising. I can listen to that song, but I'd say that's probably one of the more low-lighty songs. And then Anthem, We Are the Fire. I mean, it's cool, but it's also just not my favorite. I don't know. It's maybe a little bit too vulgar, I think, for like a party song. So I'm just kind of like, I don't know. It just, again, it reminds me of like the teenage angsty stuff where I'm just like, yeah, like, I don't know. It's all right though. Number 7, What the Dead Men Say. It's just between us. This song falls right in the middle of what I feel is Trivium's strongest 3-album run, with The Sin of the Sentence, What the Dead Men Say, and their most recent, In the Court of the Dragon. So I feel they finally have landed on their sound. These albums all sound very cohesive, very unique, very confident, whereas they were playing around with different sounds throughout like earlier parts of their career. But just when it comes down to it, for this album in particular, I just don't think the songs are as strong pound for pound as other ones on this list. Structurally, I feel like the songs, again, get a little bit repetitive. In this one, for example, there's 3 songs that I can think of: The Catastrophist, Bleed Into Me, The Defiant does it. Those songs all do the same trick where at the end of the song, they do the same chorus, but just a little bit softer. And I don't know, it got too predictable for me. And especially I remember listening to the song The Defiant, which most people were very excited about. And right before the chorus, the third chorus kicked in, I'm like, I know they're gonna do it quieter. I know they're gonna do it again. And they did it again. And I was like, again, like, we get it. which is fine, but that's why that song just didn't kind of like land with me as much as it did with other folks when it came out. Also, all these songs, most of their albums have like the single song, the song that's going to be the entrance point for a lot of new Trivium fans. This one's single song was the Bleed Into Me song, and I just think it's one of the weaker ones. I don't like it. It just doesn't do anything for me. It feels too on the nose with a lot of the stuff and just uninteresting in my opinion. Also, the album artwork looks like a testicle. So I don't know what they were going for with that. It's the flower upside down. I'm like, I don't know if they don't see that, but Trivium's one of those bands where with the whole boat rudder thing that they did on Pull Hard on Your Strings, Your Martyr, it's like sometimes I don't think they know what they're doing. But anyway, I thought that was pretty funny. But What the Dead Men Say definitely has some great highlights. Those would be the title track, What the Dead Men Say, Amongst the Shadows and the Stones, and Sickness Unto You. I think that song is underrated and awesome. Some lowlights, Bleed Into Me, Bleed Into Me, not Unto Me. Bleed Into Me, I think, is one of the weaker Trivium songs, period. Number 6 on my list is Vengeance Falls. This is the David Draymond album. Here are my thoughts on the whole Trivium, Disturbed, sound-alike album, Vengeance Falls. I don't think it sounds like Disturbed. I really don't. I think this sounds like Trivium with shorter songs. I think it's very much a Trivium album. And it's one of those things where when the internet, you get some information or some context, everyone attributes that to the reason why they don't like something. And so this became the Disturbed album for Trivium fans, and it was one of the more divisive ones. But I think that it's a really good album. I think that while structurally like the songs kind of follow a similar pattern, it has some of their strongest melodies. It has great riffs. It sounds great. Matt's voice sounds great. This is probably the best vocal delivery it sounded. I mean, up until that point, I think it was, excellent, because it's a mix of that thrash, but also like the heavy screams and things like that. Really strong album. I think this was the logical conclusion of where Trivium was trying to go on their previous albums, especially like In Waves, where they were trying to cut down things, trying to explore all different aspects of their songs, but kind of compartmentalizing them in separate tracks. Whereas this one's like, we're going to do that. We're going to try to have our cake and eat it too. We're going to have shorter tracks, but we're going to try to do everything that Trivium does in a shorter amount of time. You can very much see that in Incineration, The Broken World, where they have a bass solo. And, it's not an 8-minute epic. I think it's like a 6 or like a 5-minute something song, and it still is able to accomplish that goal of exploring a lot of different ideas. That being said, of course, I prefer the longer tracks, so I think these could have benefited from some more exploration. But there's a lot of strong ones on this album. I think the title track, Vengeance Falls, is great. It's one of their best melodies they've had. I think Strife is a great single and a really fun song live. I like the song To Believe, which I think is the one that sounds the most like Disturbed for other folks, but I think it's just good. I think it's a good melody. I think it's rad. And Through Blood and Dirt and Bone is a really solid Trivium album, or Trivium song that I go back to all the time. I'd say lowlights, No Way to Heal, I guess, is a low light, but it's not that bad. It's just kind of meh. And then actually one of the highlights is As I'm Exploding, which is a bonus track. And I think that's one of the stronger Trivium songs, period. I really love that song. It's like a really cool dynamic of him going back and forth, Matt's voice going back and forth between clean and screaming in a very interesting way with a very good melodic chorus. So yeah, Vengeance Falls. Number 5 is Ascendancy. Ascendancy rules. There's some really great, some of Trivium's strongest songs are on this album. I love the dynamics of Matt's real heavy screaming and his cleaner melodies. And you can really hear how talented they were at compositions, but also on the melodic side for some of these choruses, like some of the hookiest choruses ever. Like Light to Flies is such a great hook. It really is. But, and again, this one for me is a great representation of like Trivium's biggest strengths, where they set atmosphere so well and their songs convey, for me, like just this like a story. You know, I think some of the stronger tracks on this one are some of their strongest in their catalog, period. But it gets kind of samey for me. As far as like album listens go, it's one of those that isn't as interesting as the other 4 on this list. That being said, the highlights on this one, I would say, are Rain is one of their strongest songs, Pull Harder and the Strings Your Martyr, Gunshot to the Head of Trepidation, like Light to Flies. And then the last 2 tracks, I think, Departure and Declaration, Declaration being one of my favorite Trivium songs of all time, are incredible. The Departure song has such a cool build up into like the really heavy release and an amazing melody over the top of it at the end. And then Declaration, I think, is just one of those Trivium epics that they do so well. Lowlights, I'm not a big fan of Dying in Your Arms. I think it's kind of like Bleeding to Me, where it's just like basic, like head boppy. And again, I have no problem with bands doing that. I really don't. It's just personally, it's the ones that are the least interesting to me. So that's Ascendancy. Number 4 is In Waves. I know it didn't sound like I didn't want to scream like that because I can't really scream like that. Anyway, this song's awesome. This is the Trivium Trying to Please Everybody album, where they've got fans now from Ascendancy, from The Crusade, from Shogun, and now they're trying to wrap up everything in like different songs. And like I mentioned before, they're kind of compartmentalizing them into different songs. So they're going, you like our melodic tracks? Well, here's Watch the World Burn, and here's Of All These Yesterdays. Oh, you like our heavier songs where we're just screaming? Here's Dusk Dismantled, here's Skyline Severance, here's Chaos Reigns. And they're all separate tracks. There's not a lot of overlap. Where I find the overlap on these songs, or with these songs on this album, are actually some of their strongest, like Caustic Are the Ties That Bind and Forsake Not the Dream. Even they even have like a kind of a Metallica-esque song with Black. But what I love about the diversity in this album is you get all the peaks and valleys of Trivium. You get the softer side, where this is a bonus track, but like A Gray So Dark, and then it goes into like Drowning in Slow Motion, where you get the real heavy, brutal side. And I feel like it's a very easy album to listen to. And it feels like there's a story. I have no idea what it is, but with the intro of Capsizing the Sea, all the way out to Of All These Yesterdays, and then I always forget the outro track's name, but it's, you know, like the weird eerie sounding one. But it's great. I think that this album is such an easy listen, and that's why it ranks above Ascendancy, whereas I feel like Ascendancy has stronger songs. I'd say this album as a whole is something I prefer to listen to because of those peaks and valleys. So I would say the highlights on In Waves are the title track In Waves, which is just awesome live. It really is such a cool song. It's so simple, but it's so impactful and so powerful. And so I think they really nailed it with In Waves. Caustic Are the Ties That Bind, as I mentioned. Forsake Not the Dream. And Of All These Yesterdays. I know it's like a quiet song, but it's really good. Again, the melodies, man, they know what they're doing with songwriting. Lowlights, surprisingly, I mean, there's not very many lowlights in my opinion, but Inception of the End, I really like, but I think it's a lowlight for me just because I really thought I was gonna love it, because I really love that intro riff. I really like a lot of stuff that's going on, but I don't love the chorus just because it follows the pattern on the guitar. So like, I don't know, it's just the don't lose focus because we are halfway there. Like, it just sounds like they're playing down. I don't know, it just, for some reason, I've never liked the melody with the guitar on that song. But still a good song, so it's not really a low light, but if I had to pick one, it's that one. All right, here we go in the top 3, baby. Number 3, In the Court of the Dragon. This album rules. This album rules. It's awesome. It captures the Trivium magic. And I don't know how to put it in words what it is. But again, I think that it's the atmosphere, it is the exciting guitar riffs, it's the great melodies, it's a mix of everything, but I think that this album does that so well. This album is great. This was seriously, I was like, I don't know if this is like my favorite album. It might be my favorite Trivium album. But for the sake of this list, again, there's 2 others that I thought ranked above it today. So This album does a great job of exploring Trivium's sound in ways that don't compromise what they've already established as their sound. Again, I think the last 3 albums in particular have been great because you get a really confident Trivium. But this one does certain songs like Shadow of the Arbitoire. I don't want to say that word either. But where it's like a medieval Trivium song. It gives me something that I didn't think I needed from Trivium, but it's freaking awesome. And, you know, they've honed in so well on what they do well and so confidently going through it. And I think this one, pound for pound, I think the songs on this one, I can't think of a weak song. Even the one that's supposed to be the single, which is the Feast of Fire. Feast of Fire, is that what it's called? Yep, Feast of Fire. It's probably my favorite of their singles. I think it's awesome. I think it achieves what I think they were hoping it to do by offering it a good entryway into folks who haven't heard of Trivium before by being accessible with the melody. But it also stays true to, again, their sound. It's heavy, it's a really cool riff, it's a really fun song live. But Feast of Fire is a great song. So a few highlights on this album. Like a sword over Damocles. I don't know how to pronounce that word, but I really love that song. I think it's awesome. Again, it's a great hook, but it's also a heavy, interesting song. Then you get Shadow of the Arbitoire, as I mentioned before. They do this thing again where they're playing their songs, but they give you something new that you didn't think you wanted, but they give it to you. And then The Phalanx, I think, is one of the strongest songs that Trivium's ever done. That one, going back to what I think is that strength, is that storytelling and atmosphere. The outro of that song is one of the best closings of any Trivium albums. It is so cool. The Don't Let This Take Me, Split Me Wide Open, end of the track, because it's such a longing, like it's such like a tragic kind of demise of like this character, this protagonist in the Phalanx song. And again, it's like, that's the Trivium magic, baby. That's the stuff where not everyone can do that. That can get you involved and get you into that atmosphere and get you to experience that. And I think that song in that album does a really great job of it. Lowlights, there aren't any lowlights. I like every song on this album. So that's why I was like, this might be my favorite Trivium album, but it's up there. So it might flip-flop tomorrow, but yeah. The Court of the Dragon. All right, my number 2 Trivium album is Shogun. This album has been my number 1 forever, and I think for good reason, because this album is epic. Because this album establishes tone and atmosphere with amazing introductions in every song. The intros of these songs are unbelievable. I don't know how they came up with just the sound. I mean, you think of like Throes of Perdition, or you think of Torn Between, whatever it is and whatever. But just like the fast ripping guitar parts and everything that's going on, Shogun's introduction, like these very epic, like brooding sounds that are really impactful when it comes to establishing a tone of the song. And then this album has amazing riffs, amazing vocal delivery with great melodies, very interesting. I love the pre-choruses where they're using those primarily for the brutal screaming parts and then returning back into clean vocals for the chorus. This is where I feel like Trivium found their magic. I think Ascendancy and Crusade, maybe Ascendancy had it too, but I think this album was a combination of both what they wanted to do and what they did really well. And I think that this one yields some of the best songs of Trivium's catalog. Now, the reason why I didn't put it at number 1 today is because it's a lengthy listen. I think that the second half isn't as powerful and as strong. Songs like He Who Spawns the Furies or Prometheus and the Crucifix are great, but not as strong as the beginning half. And then you get really the best Trivium song in the title track Shogun on this album. So that leads into the highlights. Highlights, Shogun, Kirisu Gomen, I don't know how to pronounce that either. Man, they just make you gotta be pretty literate to know Trivium songs. Torn Between, I'm just gonna call it that. Throes of Perdition, as mentioned, is an amazing song. And then their single for this was Down from the Sky, which was an awesome song. Lots of highlights. I don't think there's a low light on this one. I think the length is kind of why I don't put this as number one. But again, my top three, these things could be interchangeable, so it just really depends on the day. But Shogun, number two. And we have made it to my number one. Number one Trivium album, in my opinion, is The Sin and the Sentence. Another alliteration album name with the letter S. Silence in the Snow was the previous album before Sin and the Sentence. And I gotta tell you, part of the reason why this is my favorite is because this is such a redemptive album. This is kind of, in my opinion, again, the album where Trivium found who they were and confidently wrote songs according to that. You get a mix of everything in this, but it's not like in Waves where it's compartmentalized in different sections. It's throughout. And for that, it is such an easy listen. This album I can put on and I can listen to it every day. Well, not really, not really, but probably. It's a very easy listen and has some of the strongest songs. And I think part of the reason why it's number one for me is because it's tied, it will forever be tied in that redemption aspect of Trivium. Because I gotta tell you, after Silence in the Snow, I remember being not that excited for Sin in the Sentence. I remember being like, well, if it's gonna be Silence in the Snow Part 2, I like it, I'll listen to it, but it's gonna be one of the lower ones on my Trivium catalog. So I just don't really, I wasn't anticipating this album being like hitting me the way that it did. And I remember listening to the single that they released, which is the title track, Sin in the Sentence, and I was like, all right, like this is pretty awesome. It was definitely much heavier than the other songs on Silence in the Snow, but also had Matt's vocal delivery and like execution from that album, which was good, but it was different. So I remember liking that song, especially like towards the end of the song where it kind of gets really heavy, because I feel like it introduced what this album was going to be, this transition point from Silence in the Snow, Vengeance Falls, to like, this is who we are, and we're cool with who we are now, instead of trying to like go back and forth. This is what we do. And really being blown away by the second song, Beyond Oblivion. That's one of my favorite Trivium songs. I think that song is awesome. Again, it's the atmosphere. It is the confidence that goes. This album feels like Trivium finally was okay with who they were. And like, I think Shogun was them trying to tap into what it was, like what their magic was. But then you could tell like they didn't quite figure it out, because then they follow that up with an In Waves where they're like, well, maybe we can do a little bit of everything in different tracks. This one, again, is just, it's the Trivium album. It's the one that sounds like Trivium. It's the one that encapsulates everything that they do so well. So for that reason, it's my favorite. Highlights, Beyond Oblivion, as I mentioned. I think Wretchedness Inside is awesome. Sever the Hand is really awesome. And Beauty and the Sorrow is another good song. What I will say is the low light on this one is the single. It's What Will It Take to Rip the Heart from Your Hate. I really like that song. And it's funny, again, I think the peaks and valleys, kind of like I mentioned with the strength of In Waves, is present on the Sin in the Sentence, but in a more satisfying way, because again, the songwriting isn't as broken up. It's, I don't know, it's hard to describe why this is it, but this is my favorite album. This is my favorite Trivium album. I think it's great. It does everything really well. The songs are great. The album as a whole, listening through it the whole way through, is great. Even the songs that are like kind of I could take or leave fit really well within the album itself. So that's my list. That's all 10 Trivium albums ranked. What are your rankings? I'm curious to hear about it. Really cool that you can have just different rankings with a band like Trivium, because I feel like they have explored a lot of different sounds. So let me know what your favorite albums are. Let me know why, and let me know what some of your favorite songs on those albums are. Anyway, thank you for listening, and peace.